Welcome to NetApp CIO Central. I'm Bill Miller, your host for this Executive Interchange series. Today we have a wonderful guest and a good friend of mine on the show, Mike Kelly, CIO of Red Hat. How are you doing today, Mike?
I'm all right. Happy Veterans Day.
Wonderful reason to celebrate, and thanks for joining us. We got a lot to talk about today, Mike. I want to get to the topics of kind of the new Red Hat. I want to talk a little bit about cloud, where you're driving your internal team. Let me start with the partnership. Red Hat and NetApp have this really beneficial, long-standing partnership. As a matter of fact, our branded Cloud One platforms are just filled with capabilities and narratives with Red Hat, using OpenShift, using Ansible, using other platforms. Recently, we've built more and more capabilities jointly with IBM. And of course, this has all become more and more interwoven with IBM's purchase of Red Hat. How do you see our companies continuing to thrive together in this new era?
We have had a long-standing partnership, and NetApp's been a cornerstone of our IT environment at Red Hat for many, many years. It's our primary storage layer, if you will. And then, we've got it connected up into our hybrid cloud environment. We also have a lot of, as you mentioned, go-to-market solutions for customers. And the way I see it is, it's a customer-centric solution. I know that IBM feels the same way when it comes to customer centricity. You got two phenomenal technologies that customers want, and it's our job to make them work together.
I see Red Hat as emblematic of fierce developer individualism and freedoms. I mean, that's what you guys have always stood for over the years. Linux and OpenShift, containers, Kubernetes, Ansible automation. You guys have always been the industry upstarts. You're really the poster children for open everything. How do you see that fitting with the IBM mantra? I was kidding the other day with a friend, and I said, I think, maybe Red Hat is the dilithium crystals that power IBM forward into the future. How do you maintain this unique Red Hat culture with everything that's going on?
Well, you're right to point out we're deeply, deeply, deeply committed to being open, and that doesn't just mean open source. We've actually taken the principles of open source technology development and tried to apply them to our own culture. And that's a great thing. It really is what draws people to the company. It's a different way of interacting. Everyone has a voice. Some of the tenets of open source are, meritocracy. Great ideas can come from anywhere. Everyone has a voice. Everyone collaborates. So we try to do that at scale, across all of our approaching 20,000 associates. Some days are better than others, but I'd say generally we get it right, and it's something we're really, really serious about. And true to its word, IBM has left our culture be our culture. And the honest truth is that we have had some influence into ways of thinking with IBM, and vice versa. Our culture is, it's our cornerstone. We talk about it a lot. We take care of it. It's evolving, but it really is rooted in that concept that a great idea can come from anywhere. Everyone has a voice, and everyone has a duty to use that voice. And technically speaking, we've got some of the best engineers on the planet, and we're really proud of that. And they do some really cool stuff.
I was reading the other day on the internet, and there was a quote by an Esther Shine in CXO. And she said, since the pandemic, CIO's stature has grown, and 52% are engaging with their CEOs, more than any other C-suite leader, according to a newly released IBM study. I'd like to hear your view on kind of being a modern CIO today and enabling a real company culture of innovation, and which is absolutely essential to companies like Red Hat.
To me, this job is and I think always will be about change. It's about the business model. What's changing? What's different? Are we on our toes, or are we on our heels about that? And for me, the success of this job has always been rooted in a strong understanding and underpinning of the business, its drivers, what markets we're in, how we play in those markets, what our position in those markets is currently, and what it can be in the future. And then thinking about a long plan of what we might try to evangelize across the company, and then really steady steps every single day. I think where people get wrapped around the axle on transformation is they just make it too big, and people can't understand it. If you have the vision in your head and you have the ability to articulate every step of the way and constant communication, constant orientation towards delivering value. For me, it's just paying close attention to what's happening every single moment and paying attention to what's happening around us and trying to make sense of it. The partnership with the CEO, I find to be very interesting. I mean, technology is a tremendous asset for any company today. It didn't always used to be that way. I mean, you and I have been in this role long enough to know that, most of the conversation about our job was, you cost too much and you take too long. Just make sure everything works. Now it's, well, how are we going to use this technology to differentiate ourselves in the markets we play, the markets we could be playing in, and drive the company forward? So, for me, just having, again, that affinity and deep understanding for what businesses we're in and what businesses we can be in and how we're playing in those is what it's all about.
Yeah, and in this era of digital, right, the stakes are actually higher because we can impact more across the business and everything we do. I really like your comments about staying the course and taking this a bit at a time and continuing to go and not letting large, dominating projects, upend the teams, which can happen because of complexity.
It's a really fun time right now to be a technologist, to be a CIO. I've seen this funny meme all over the internet of and presentations that I see that say, what was the catalyst for your digital transformation? And option A is CEO, option B is CIO, CTO, option C is COVID-19, and that's the one that's circled in red ink. And I think that's kind of funny.
Some background commonality you and I have as being CIOs in a kind of company where we're in a tech industry, we're delivering sophisticated IT solutions to discerning IT buyers, right? Not every CIO in America or in the world does that, right? And if you're in a tool and die company as the CIO, you've got different concerns. But in our unique world, we're using the stuff, we're building the stuff, we're selling to people like us. What if some of the experiences that you found are most interesting and or maybe most challenging about, a CIO in an industry where balance of trade and all these things come into play?
The first thing I would say is, and I remind people, is that I'm not a salesperson. But I try to help our sales team because I have the unique ability to choose. We study the market like anybody else would. And if the Red Hat product is the best product for our needs, we implement the Red Hat product. We have a robust programs called Red Hat on Red Hat, but not everything in my shop is a Red Hat product. And we try to make sure that in doing so, we can give customers great context to how we've deployed. When I have conversations with other CIOs, it's a very quickly become kindred spirits on what it is that we're trying to do. And then we explain how we're using our technologies to get there. There's also this mutual respect that has to be developed, derived, and nurtured with the engineering department. I always get this joke, well, how do you do your job when there's so many other smart technologists around you? I'm like, well, they help me do my job. Because I listen to them,
Exactly.
pay attention to them, and I try to help them. And we have the means to do that from our department.
I can't not talk to you today, Mike, about talent, because this has to be the craziest era we've ever lived through. This, I'll call it the post-pandemic talent release, and everybody in, kind of itchy to go do the next thing and get back in an office somewhere, and everybody's shifting one chair right. How do you come out of this pandemic, lessons learned, looking at talent sourcing, and how you see technology talent going forward after this last 18 months?
Number one is we have to have a compelling vision for people to want to join our company. I have this saying with candidates when I interview them. I say, you're interviewing us as much as we're interviewing you. If you don't buy what we're selling, if you don't understand who we are, if you don't try to understand our company as part of the process, you're not doing yourself any favors. I mean, there's lots of work out there, and we try to make an environment where you can come and do your best work. The second part is just trying to be a whole new level of empathy to all of our associates. And that can take place on a variety of dimensions. I mean, for me, I've been concerned about everyone's mental health for the last 2 years, myself included. I mean, I've had a lot of hard days, as I'm sure you have too, where it's just like, my gosh, how do we keep going here? And so I think just being empathetic about that with our associates is what's going to keep people capable of doing their best work. That also transcends to diversity, equity, and inclusion, which we're laser focused on upping our game in that regard and being students of what's happening there. I think a lot of folks have to take the default position that they have a lot to learn on that dimension. And so that in and of itself is a great thing. We have a variety of groups across the company that have come together. I'm the executive chair of our neuro-diversity community, which I care deeply about, again, back to people's mental health and well-being. And then the third thing is I think you need to make sure that people can come and have a little bit of fun. I mean, it's hard to do that in our current configuration. And I think, people would probably dread having another virtual happy hour. But there are a lot of things that you can do and a lot of simple gestures that can be made to folks to make them feel part of a team, no matter where they are. The final thing I'd say about the talent is we like many companies, had this affinity for hiring into the locations where we had large concentrations of people. And the pandemic has proven that that's now no longer a requirement for us. So it really has helped widen the aperture tremendously in terms of our search for talent. We have long met the talent where they are. And I think we have the tools, the technology, the infrastructure to allow that to happen. And we also, I think, have the ways of working now to make that happen. If you're a manager and you're not like making your folks feel that it's okay to stay where you are, I think you're not leveraging the talent that's available to you.
Let me cut over, got to talk data for a couple minutes. NetAppers are extremely data driven, as you might imagine. You might even say that to some degree, in a nice way, that we're data zealots. As you think about data and look at your business and look at industry and look at your IT shop and how you leverage data, where are we right and where are we wrong around these data compulsions as we close out 2021?
We've taken an approach to err more on the creator side of analytics than on having, that being a privilege for certain people. Where I think we've got it right is getting a focus on the enterprise side of the data, the parts that just have to be 100% right. Putting in place data governance, putting in place data standards, data stewards, enterprise data sets, certified enterprise data sets, where I think we've got that part going well. On this other side of that, where I think we can do better is there are certain elements of data that people just need good enough access to. They're curious, and you have to bring into practice, the concepts of statistics that we all learned around things like confidence intervals and good enough. Like, I'm trying to use data to support a hypothesis that I have to go to the next step. So I don't need it to be all ticked and tied and perfect. I need to say this is directionally correct in supporting my argument. And so there are now a lot of things that are happening in the data and analytics space in the industry that are allowing for those things to happen. Rapid, quick access to data. Companies that are not requiring IT departments to build these massive data warehouses and all the things we've been doing our whole career. They're saying like, hey, I just want to get at this streaming data and I want to make some assumptions about it. To me, that's where the future is balancing out the two needs to be data driven. Data driven doesn't mean you have to be 100% accurate on 100% of things.
I love it because really what we're doing with a lot of this new data modeling, and we're looking at propensities, right? It's not 100% certain that something's going to happen, but what does the data tell you is likely to happen or statistically probable to happen? And I think that's a really interesting view of data. Most people get fixated on the reporting end of things and the availability of those reports versus what does that data really tell you?
Exactly. I mean, you can't be like relatively reasonably sure about your financials, but if you're looking at buying patterns or data that you ingest, with all the things that are happening, it was streaming with Kafka and things like that, where it's just tons of data coming at you real fast, and where you're also seeing these massive data sets that are hopefully sitting on your storage, but you need to be able to get at them instantly. There's the the enterprise has to be correct data, and then there's the experimentation data. And I think that is a really where IT groups can change their thinking about how they approach that.
Hey, I want to get back to this notion of open source that we talked about a little earlier. Talk to me a little bit about how this notion of open source aligns with the cloud ambitions of so many companies and CIOs out there today. I mean, to some degree at Red Hat, you feel to me a little bit like you're in the engine room driving cloud, right? So how do you see that and the role in the emergence of cloud?
We spend a disproportionate amount of time upstream in communities as Red Hat, helping shape and having credibility in many of those projects. Now, there's a million open source projects out there. I mean, I think that is the way that software is being developed, and it's based around user-driven innovation. So if you look at what's happening, it's like an operator comes up with a better way to do their job. They produce, they open up an open source project around that, and then that becomes, it can become a company if need be. So we like to call ourselves an enterprise software company with an open source development model. Those words are really, really important, because what we compete with a lot is the DIYers of the world. Oh, well, I'll just take the free version of it and I'll bring it into the enterprise. And that's great, to experiment. But once it is a core part of what you do, you need someone standing behind it. As it relates to your question around the cloud, again, if you buy this notion that the large scale innovation is coming from user-driven innovation, and user-driven innovation is in open source, I mean, the cloud to me is the greatest playground for open source projects. And Kubernetes, a container is part of Linux. It's the namespace of the Linux operating system. And we had Red Hat Enterprise Linux. We were working upstream on containers 8, 9, 10 years ago. And other companies, Google, et cetera, have come into that and done a really great job. So I see what's happening in the cloud and the need for open source. And we do a lot of education. Linux is the operating system that runs the cloud, period. Everybody may have different instantiations, different distributions of said Linux. We obviously think Red Hat Linux is the best. We are in the engine room, and that's great, because now we can sit and differentiate on top of that. I worry sometimes when I talk to other CIOs and they say things to me like, oh yeah, well, we're running our own version of this. I'm like, okay, well, that's great to an extent, but at some point you have to codify the knowledge that you have in your organization. Not everything can be tacit knowledge, right? So we all have been there where you put all your hopes in one person. Oh, well, if so-and-so ever left, this thing would fall apart, right? So we try to, as it relates to open source, to continue to nurture the community to prevent that from ever happening.
Well, you do a beautiful job of orchestration of that. Most of us running large, important platforms want that supportability, right? We really demand that, want the innovation to continue that open source provides, but you also need the supportability to count on it around the clock and around the world. This is the era of partnership, right? The go-to-market partnerships, the channel partners we deal with, associations with hyperscalers, the big cloud companies that are out there today. And then even partnerships within our own companies. CIOs are partnering, I think, like they've never done before with other CXOs and executives. How do you see the CIO role helping to facilitate those kind of partnerships and relationships going into the future?
To me, number one, it's a customer centricity approach to the world. Technology companies are coming together to help customers solve problems. And to me, that's phenomenal. And I think when you're trying to solve these types of problems, it does require, companies like yours and ours to, put the customer first, put the needs of our company aside. Let's come together and build the right solution for the customer. And that pays larger dividends, I think, than shutting others out. For example, if a customer was coming to us and saying like, hey, we've got a huge NetApp footprint, we're trying to roll out hybrid cloud, how have you got done it, Mike? I may call you up and Bill and say, hey, let's go meet with these folks and have a chat with them and just give them how it worked and what the bits and pieces of it are. I think that's tremendously powerful, right? I think partnerships internally how the CIO can help facilitate that. Or I think this affinity and understanding of the business model and what we're trying to solve for, and listening very carefully to see where the intersection of those two functions are coming together and how technology might help enable that. Because I think if you come in and you just blare out like we need to do this technically, people just don't get it. If you don't like put it on their terms and say like, hey, in marketing we're trying to do X, Y, and Z. I understand this is what you're trying to do, right? Oh, okay. Well, here's 2 or 3 solutions that we might be able to bring to bear relatively quickly to make you be able to achieve that. And so I think those intersections of functions, that's where the magic happens in companies. And when they don't come together, that's where a lot of this dysfunction comes from in companies. And as a CIO, you can be subject to that as well.
Coming out of the pandemic and some of the new goals we have as businesses, what are you doing with your teams? What's driving your teams out of the pandemic, and what's on the roster for you for the next year or so?
It's very interesting how we've evolved the discussion of coming out of it. We were calling it return to office at first. What's our return to office framework? Like, whoa, time out. If all we're going to do is revert back to where we were, then we didn't use this horrible situation as a learning opportunity to move forward. What really is in focus for us, continuing to digitize our customer success and our customer engagement processes, whether it be with sales or ongoing customer success, continuing to stay focused and fueling our unique culture and how it adds value. And as we grow and change, how some of the things we used to do are no longer pragmatic for the things we need to be doing. By and large, the biggest thing that we're focusing on is helping people achieve this vision of hybrid cloud. We just believe that is the way of the future. And as a CIO, I mean, it really does give you just the ultimate in what I call option value. To build your IT function in a hybrid way has all sorts of benefit. To build it in a all in on one thing way, I think paints you into a corner. So we're focused on customers, trying to help them get through that. And I'm building the same thing in my shop. And I hope that as we do it, that the artifacts and the stories and the lessons that we learn along the way can be beneficial to others.
Really, we're quite aligned. I mean, that's what NetApp's focused on, hybrid multi-cloud solutions for our customers that give them choice. You're doing the same thing. And then we're doing that in our own IT shop, making sure that we can run our business and then develop those narratives and share that with our customers as to how that works. So a lot of parallels here. Hey, Mike, it's really been great having you on the program today. Thanks so much for participating.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Bill. It's good to see you again. And I hope we can maybe, see each other in person one of these days.
Okay, that's all today from CIO Central. And remember this quote, "In God we trust, all others bring data." Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.